Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Muslim Student Association at UIC is excited to welcome you all to the first day of Discover Islam Week 2024. Discover Islam Week, if you're not aware, is the MSA's largest annual da'wah initiative aiming to develop an understanding of Islam among both Muslim and non-Muslim students. This year's theme, From Conviction to Action, highlights the process of developing a firm conviction in Islam, then translating that conviction into purposeful actions with the aqidah, the creed of Islam, as our basis. Inshallah, each day of Discover Islam Week 2024 will also have a sub-theme that we focus on. Monday, which is today, will be defining life's purpose. Tomorrow, Tuesday, will be Islam in context. Then Wednesday is a system of life. And Thursday, the final day, will be determination for change. Each day will feature 3 esteemed guest speakers with their times at the podium beginning at 11 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. respectively. Today's sub-theme is defining life's purpose, as mentioned, and today's speakers are Brother Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician, joining us virtually, followed by Imam Ja'far Hawa joining us in person, and Madiha also joining us in person, inshallah. The first topic that we will be addressing today is, does a creator really exist? We've all thought about it at some point, regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of what religion we may have been raised with, regardless of what religion we may follow today. Everyone instinctually wonders where we originated from. It's such an important topic for us to ponder about. And once we reach that conclusion of what we believe in that satisfies our hearts and our minds, that is what we're able to build the rest of our life upon. To shed light on this important topic and to answer this question, we have Brother Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician, joining us. Brother Jake is known for having debates with atheists and Christians and presenting Islam as the rational alternative solution. He has his own YouTube channel, The Muslim Metaphysician, that has accumulated nearly 100,000 subscribers. He has worked on multiple courses on Christianity, helping institutions including ICNA, Why Islam, and Sapiens Institute. Brother Jake holds 2 bachelor's degrees, one in criminal justice and another in philosophy, and he's currently working towards his master's degree in philosophy and theology. Without any further delay, we would like to welcome Brother Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician, to answer the question, does a creator really exist?
Okay, just want to make sure you guys can see my screen here, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so as far as I know, I'm the first presenter thus far this week. So I'm very privileged and honored to be invited to speak at this event. Unfortunately, I'm here from far away, but nevertheless, I'm here. I can't mess this up too bad or say that I've been the worst speaker thus far, because nobody has come before me yet this week. So that's one good benefit. Nevertheless, I hope that you guys will benefit from this talk, inshallah, and that you guys will get something out of this. So the topic I've been tasked with discussing today is, does a creator really exist? Now, as was introduced, this is, of course, a very serious topic, a very, very serious question that Muslims, especially living in the West, have to face. And sometimes they have to deal with their own doubts, their own concerns, or even if that's not the case, maybe sometimes explaining their faith and their reasons for believing in a creator or believing in God to somebody else. So this is a very important topic. But before I get into intellectual arguments for the existence of a creator, I want to frame this a little bit differently, a little bit different than I'm even used to at times. Because what I want to talk about first is, do we really need an argument for the creator's existence, right? And some people may be thinking, well, Jake, I mean, we came all the way here. Some people are busy, they have classes and other things going on. And we came here, and what do you mean you're not going to present us with an argument? Don't worry. slow down. I will present you guys with some arguments, inshallah. But I think it's important to frame this question properly from the outset. Do we really need an intellectual argument to be justified as Muslims, as those who believe in a creator? Do we really need to go through these jumps and hoops of presenting intellectual arguments? And I don't think that we do. And I'll give some reasons for why I think that. A common person like, somebody who lives in a village, an elderly person, you can even think of your grandparents, your grandmother, we would say that they believe in God, and presumably they're justified in believing in God and believing in a creator. But would they be able to, on the spot, give some presentation like this and wow the audience about these sophisticated rational arguments that they present for creator? I don't think so. Many of them wouldn't be able to do so. Does that mean that they're not justified in believing in God or believing in a creator? I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that that's a reasonable position to take. Otherwise, we would have to say that the majority of Muslims are not justified in believing in the creator. And I think if you asked a common person, well, hey, grandma, why do you believe in God? Why do you believe in a creator? Many of them would say, just look around. Don't you see everything that exists and how, designed it looks, or how sophisticated nature looks, and all of this and all of its majesty had to come from somewhere. They would give some type of, we could call, simple answer or simple reason or explanation for why they believe in creator, but they wouldn't go through some detailed philosophical or scientific argument, not most of them anyway. So I think that's very important for us to note from the outset. Now, does that mean that we can't present arguments? I don't want people to be confused and say, well, Jake, you're saying we can't present arguments? Of course we can. But arguments are not necessary. So I want to make a distinction between whether or not arguments can be presented or whether or not they're necessary. I'm arguing that they're not necessary for most people, and I'll explain why through the Islamic concept of the fitrah. But nevertheless, they can be presented for those who require rational arguments. Maybe somebody has a shubha or a doubt, or maybe they were raised by a non-Muslim family. Maybe they were raised by atheists and they were fed, this atheism, the notion that there is no creator much of their whole life. So when they become a teenager and start experiencing these deeper questions related to the nature of the universe and where did we come from and where is our purpose, what's our purpose in life, they were told all along that there is no creator, you don't have any responsibility to a creator. And so for those people, maybe an argument is required, right? So what I'm trying to say from the outset is not everyone requires an argument, and some people may. It all depends on the person. So arguments can be given as a sort of medicine to those who are sick. I don't mean this as to be offensive. Maybe there's some atheists in the audience. I don't know. Or maybe they'll watch, because I was informed that they're going to be recording this. Maybe they'll watch it later. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense or in any way to hurt anyone. I just mean that in the sense of, and it'll make more sense when I explain the Islamic concept of the fitrah, that arguments are not necessary, but they can be given as a medicine to those who are sick, those who require an argument or evidence, further evidence, because of a doubt that they or some type of experience that they had. Okay, so like I said, don't worry, I will present some arguments here in just a second. But why do I think this? Why do I think that Muslims and people in general don't really need an argument for the existence of a creator? Well, in Islam, we have a concept which many may be familiar with which is called the fitrah. In the Quran, chapter 30, verse 30, it says this: so direct your face toward the religion, inclining towards truth. Adhere to the fitrah of Allah, upon which He has created all people. No change should there be in the creation of Allah. That is the correct religion, but most of the people do not know. Okay? And so we see here this concept of the fitrah that everyone was created upon. Now, what does that mean? I'm not going to give my own tafsir of the ayah, of the verse of the Quran. I'm going to show that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam explained this verse in a hadith, in an authentic hadith, which is mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. He says this: the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, commenting on this ayah, said, every child is born with a true faith. Every child is born upon the fitrah. What is that? To worship none but Allah alone. But his parents convert him to Judaism or to Christianity or to Magianism, right? And even atheism or whatever ism you want to put on the end of this. So what is the point? The Prophet ﷺ, and what the Quran and the Sunnah teach, is that every human being is created upon the natural disposition, the fitrah, to believe in a creator, to know that there's only one God worthy of worship, right? But interestingly enough, the Prophet, peace be upon him, says his parents convert him to Judaism, Christianity, atheism, whatever, all these other isms. So what does that tell us? Did these people, did these babies, did these infants, did these young children, before they were fed these false narratives about religion and about a creator, did they need to be presented with arguments to know that a creator existed? No, they didn't. They had a natural disposition to know and recognize the creator from the outset. So when I say that arguments aren't always necessary, it's in light of this Islamic teaching that we know this. Now, I'm going to also show evidence of this from secular sources to back this up, because some people may say, well, Jake, I don't believe in any concept of the fitrah. Maybe non-Muslims say, I'm not buying into this. So is there any evidence to actually back up this claim? And yes, there is. So I'm going to go through, I mean, there's a lot of evidence, but I'm going to go through just a little bit of evidence here. And this is based on certain psychological studies that confirm the fitrah. Okay. So this was a study that was done by Justin L. Barrett, and he took part of this with a bunch of other researchers that were involved. It was a huge project. Almost 2 million pounds, almost 2 million British pounds were involved in this product. Involved 57 researchers who conducted over 40 separate studies in 20 countries, representing a diverse range of cultures. So they weren't only studying, Muslim children or Christian children. It was many different countries, many different societies, and it was ranging across over 20 countries, as you can see. So here's one thing that they gave as an example as part of the study. So they were dealing with children because they wanted to figure out whether or not children have this fitrah, although they didn't frame it in those terms, but this natural disposition to believe in a God. So it says, children were asked whether their mother would know the contents of a box in which she could not see. All right, so imagine a child is presented with a box and they say, oh, well, do you think that your mother would know what's inside this box, even if she can't see it? So children aged 3, so up to 3 years old, believed that their mother and God would always know the contents of the box. But by the age of 4, children started to understand that their mothers are not all-seeing and all-knowing. In other words, they started to recognize as they got older that their mothers wouldn't know all the time what's in this mysterious box. However, children, they found, this is what the study found, children continued to believe in an all-seeing, all-knowing supernatural agent such as God. So even when they reached the age of 4, they tended to still believe in an all-seeing, all-knowing supernatural agent such as God that would know the contents of this box. Now, this is not an argument necessarily to prove that God exists. That's not the point. It's a study to show that the Islamic concept of the fitrah is actually justified. There's actually secular evidence and secular studies that show and can actually demonstrate that children are born with a natural disposition to know and believe in a creator. Nobody told them, oh, by the way, there is a God, there is a creator that knows what's inside the box. That wasn't part of the study. But they had this natural disposition to say such things. Now, how does Islam explain that? Islam explains that based on the concept of the fitrah. Now, how do the secularists explain it? Atheists explain it? They may come up with some other idea, I don't know, as to why that is the case. But we, as Muslims, have our own position as to why that's happening. So let's go a bit further here. And this is from Justin L. Barrett. He wrote a book. He's the same one who was basically head of that study, which is called Born Believers, The Science of Children's Religious Belief. And this is based on his research, based on his studies. He says, and this is a quote from the book, that belief in gods begins in childhood and typically continues into adulthood, places it in the same class as believing in gravity, the permanence of solid objects, the continuity of time, the predictability of natural laws, that causes precede effects, that animals bear young similar to themselves, that people have thoughts and wants that motivate and guide their actions, that some things are morally right or wrong, that their mothers love them, and numerous other ideas about the world. I favor the approach that regards our minds as basically trustworthy to deliver true beliefs, and that our naturally arising childish beliefs should not be regarded as true, should be regarded as true until we have good reason to suspect them as being problematic. It is not clear to me that we can do otherwise and still function as normal, sane human beings. So this is his claim based on the research and studies that he's done on childhood psychology. And people can look up these studies. I recommend that you don't take my word for anything I have to say. Do your own research, check the sources that I'm quoting here. And what they found is that children do have this natural tendency to believe in a creator, even if their parents are not religious, even if they weren't told that there's a God, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, right? And they typically continue to believe that. And it's interesting that the hadith from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam explicitly says, look, they're born as Muslims or upon the fitrah, the natural disposition to believe and know that there's a creator, but their parents and society turns them into atheists and Christians and Jews, etc. Right? So, and this also fits naturally with the secular studies on this topic. Okay, so all that being said, some people are wondering, okay, is Jake actually going to present an argument here? Don't worry, I'm going to get to it. Just sit tight. So the key point that I want people to know, as Muslims, we don't necessarily need a rational argument. You may already have that natural disposition to know that there's a creator, but what the scholars talk about is they say, scholars of Islam talk about, is that sometimes the fitrah, it never completely dissipates or disappears. However, it can become clouded. You can think of it as maybe like cobwebs, spider webs, become around the fitrah, or the mechanism of the fitrah, so it doesn't have the same force or the same power. And so because of that, and what causes that is shubuhat, or doubts, or you can say obfuscations that are presented to the person, whether it be from their parents or their teachers or their friends or something they saw on YouTube, whatever it may be. And so over time, that fitrah becomes clouded. And because of that, some of those people do require arguments. We can't just turn around and say, hey, you're lying. You know, you believe in God. That's what Islam teaches. We can't turn around and simply say that. We have to then deal with them where they're at, or at least where they claim to be at. So that's what I want people to understand. And, you know, many people, as I said, many Muslims would not be able to give some sophisticated rational argument for the proof or existence of a creator, right? But they would be able to tell you something. They would have some reason. They wouldn't say, well, just because I like ice cream or something silly like that, therefore there's a God. They would give some kind of basic answer. And this is through my experience. They would say, well, look at everything. This had to come from somewhere. Something had to create it. It's designed. It appears to be designed. It must be have a grand designer of the universe. They would give you some kind of basic answer. Now, my experience giving dawah to atheists, and take it with a grain of salt, this is just my experience, but my experience in dealing with atheists, or those who claim to not believe in a God, is that most of the time, for these people, it's not a genuine intellectual problem. It's not genuinely an intellectual problem. And some people may be thinking, come on, Brother Jake, okay, we're Muslims here, but you got to be fair. Some people may have genuine doubts, and that's certainly true. I'm not trying to deny that in any way, but my experience is that for most people, it's not a genuine intellectual problem. Most of the time, it is a spiritual, psychological, emotional, or social issue. Usually falls into one of those categories as to why they are not accepting a creator, or even more specifically, obviously, in this presentation, I'm not going into that much detail about why Islam is true specifically, although I will give a couple reasons for thinking that later on. So my experience is that most people, it's not a genuine intellectual issue. I'll give an example of that. So I'm part of, I think the brother mentioned earlier, I have taught courses for Sapiens Institute. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but Brother Muhammad Hijab and Hamza Sources run it. And so I've taught some courses for it, but I also, in my spare time, have volunteered for a program that they have, which is called the Lighthouse Mentoring Program. And this program, you can sign up. It's completely free. I recommend it if anybody is interested after hearing this. You could be a Muslim who has doubts or concerns or questions, or maybe you're a Muslim who wants to give dawah and wants advice on tips on how to do that. You could be a non-Muslim who's interested in Islam and but has questions or concerns. We get all different sorts of people that call in there. So we had a guy who called in, and you basically make an appointment on there, and you get a one-on-one appointment with somebody like me on Zoom for 1 hour. So this guy, he was initially claiming to be a Muslim, and he called in and seemed like a nice young guy, probably somewhere around your guys' age, and in their 20s, low 20s, something like that. And he said, okay, Jake, I've got some questions. I was like, okay, what's going on? So I don't remember exactly, but he had some questions about some different scientific theories and how they related to Islam. So I answered the first one. He brought up some scientific theory. Oh, Jake, what do you think of this? I said, okay. So I gave him, an answer to the best of my ability. And then he asked about another scientific theory. So I explained, what Islam has to say about this. And then a third time, he asked about another scientific theory. So I answered him. And then he went on to the fourth thing. About the time we got to the fourth one, and it just didn't seem right to me. It just seemed a bit strange. I said, brother, is there something deeper actually going on here? Is there actually something deeper going on? It seems like your main concern is not merely with these scientific theories. Isn't that right? And he just got quiet. He was kind of shocked. I said, no, it's fine. Just tell me what's going on. And he stopped and he said, well, I don't really believe in God. I'm not really sure that a creator exists. I said, oh, wow, that's interesting. Why didn't you open up with that? We could have been speaking about that. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I started giving him arguments. And it has a good ending, actually, which I found out recently because I've been telling this story. So I'm sorry if people have heard me tell it before and maybe they're bored by it. But it's always stuck in my head as an important story in Dawah. And so I said, you know what? Okay, we're not going to deal with these scientific nonsense. I'm in the next 30 minutes while I still have you here. I'm going to prove to you that a creator exists. Okay, so I went through some arguments, explaining. By the end of it, he said, oh, alhamdulillah, thank you very much, Brother Jake. Definitely I believe God exists. I really appreciate your time and your patience with me. And okay, great. I thought, wow, that was a great ending to the story. Next week comes around and he comes back at the same time. Same day, same time. I said, oh, maybe this is a good sign. He's back and I don't know, maybe he just got a question or I don't know. Let's see what he's going to talk about. So he comes back and he says, Brother Jake, you did prove to me that God exists last time, but now I'm doubting my own rational faculties. I don't believe that I can actually think logically. I can't trust my own reasoning, my own intellect. I can't trust it. I've reached a conclusion that makes sense, but now I can't trust my own sense. So I said, oh, okay. I said, why is that? That's quite shocking. And, he was just very confused. So I started, I don't want to say playing games with him, but I teased out the implications of what he was saying. So I said, okay, really, you can't trust your own reasoning. I said, well, then maybe you can't even trust that you're on this call right now. Maybe you're not on this call. So if you can't trust your own reasoning, you can't trust that you're on this call. So what's the point of even me wasting my time now, starting to talk to you and give you arguments? I could just be a figment of your imagination. And I started going through all these examples like this, and he was trying to push back and forth. And eventually I just said to him like this. I said, your problem is not that you don't believe in God, not that you don't have enough evidence, not that you don't have an argument for why. You already, by your own admission, do. You don't want to believe in God. And he said, oh, well, he got kind of shy all of a sudden and quiet. I said, you don't want to believe in God. He said, oh, no, Brother Jake, it's not like that. It's just, I said, no, you don't want to believe in God. I'm sorry, I have to tell you just like that. You don't want to believe in God, right? And eventually, this carried on for a little while, and we hung up, and I didn't hear from him. And then, subhanAllah, I've been telling this story. I told this in another video a couple of years ago. I guess it went out on YouTube because this happened, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, something like that. And the guy, subhanAllah, actually commented on the YouTube video when he heard me telling this story. He said, I'm that guy from the video. I just found out about this recently. I didn't know because I don't check all the YouTube comments. And somebody told me, Jake, that guy commented. He saw the video and it was him. He said it was him. And guess what? He's a Muslim. He believes in Allah. He believes in Islam. and he wanted to thank you. He was in the comments saying, you know, thank you very much, Brother Jake. I know I was difficult, but you were very patient with me, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I say all of that to say that in my experience many times, and just like with him, wasn't a genuine intellectual problem. There were other issues, and I don't want to go into his personal life too much, but there were other things going on which were causing him problems. Okay. So let me go on further here, because people are still wondering, okay, are we going to get into any arguments? Okay, so let's, for people who do genuinely have a doubt or a shubha or a concern, what are some arguments we can give to prove that a creator exists, right? I want to point out it's not necessary to give these arguments, but sometimes for certain people who have experienced doubts and have been brainwashed even to a certain extent by family, society, or friends, or whatever the case is, they may need an argument. So we have to be prepared for that. And there are a number of different arguments, but I'm going to try to give two very simple arguments. And I'm going to give a thought experiment to explain it, or an analogy. So this argument is sometimes called a first cause argument, or the idea that there's a creator of everything that exists. Now, one question we can ask to get this started to illustrate how the argument works is this. Imagine the Earth exists, and of course it does. We're not like starting to doubt our own rational faculties like that brother was. The Earth exists, and we now know, of course, due to, at least we're told anyway, gravity, as to why it's not falling down. But I'm going to give you something just to illustrate the argument. So imagine we have the Earth, and the question is, why is the Earth not falling down? Now, to answer that, it may be positive, may be used to explain. The Earth is not falling down because it is resting on the back of a giant turtle. Now, some people are thinking, where are we going with this, Jake? This sounds crazy. But it's just to illustrate a point here. Okay, the Earth doesn't fall down because it's resting on the back of a giant turtle. Okay, so now you've answered the question, right? You've given an explanation for why the Earth is not falling down. Okay, but then somebody sharp might come along and say, but why doesn't the turtle fall down? I say, okay, you got a point there. And what's the answer to that? Because it is resting on the back of an even bigger turtle, an even more giant turtle, right? Is propping up the other turtle. Okay, well, then we ask, well, what is stopping the second turtle from falling down? Well, there's another even larger turtle, and so on and so forth. And if you've ever heard, I don't know if some of you have ever heard the saying, it's turtles all the way down. Part of that actually comes from this illustration. Turtles all the way down means there's an infinite regress of turtles all the way down. The first one was used to explain holding up the Earth, and then the next one's holding up, and so on and so forth, all the way down, down, down. Infinitely meaning going on forever. There's no stop to the amount of turtles that are holding the other one up. So the story goes on and on and on. Now, what is the problem with this, and how is it connected to God? What is the problem with this? Well, the same feature of why the Earth or anything else is not falling is never actually explained. Why? Because the Earth is not falling because there's a turtle. Okay, but the turtle has the same feature of that it should be falling down as the Earth. So we need something else to explain that. Okay, well, there's a larger turtle, but then we need something to explain that. And there's another larger turtle. And it keeps going, going, going infinitely. Well, if that's the case, you're never actually explaining why the Earth is, you never actually have an explanation for why the Earth is not falling from the outset. Because the same feature it has, which is the propensity to fall down, that it should be falling, is explained by something else that has that same feature. And then that is explained by something else which has the same feature. So in reality, you're never actually explaining why the earth is not falling down. Now, how does that connect to creator or God existence? Well, the same is true for things that have a cause. Okay, if we say the earth has a cause or the earth came into being, well, what's the explanation for that? Well, we can say a turtle created it. I would just making up something silly just for you to understand. And then they say, oh, well, it's this other turtle created it, or another one, another. But you're never actually explaining it unless you get back to an eternal, meaning a being that was not caused, was not created, did not have a beginning in time, that always existed. We must get back to an eternal, uncaused cause to explain the phenomenon of why things are caused or dependent upon other things, why they have a beginning in time. The only way to explain that, unless you want to have turtles all the way down, and if you have turtles all the way down, you're not even explaining why the earth is not falling or why the earth is caused to begin with. So in order to stop that process, you can't have that infinite regress. You must eventually get back to an eternal, uncaused cause to explain this phenomenon. Now, some people may say, okay, Jake, we're buying into it so far, but maybe it just goes back to the Big Bang, some whatever billion years ago. They keep changing how many billion years ago it is. Okay, so maybe there was a beginning in terms of causation. Maybe there is a first cause, but maybe it's the Big Bang or something like that. Why does it have to be an intelligent creator that has knowledge and a will, right? Why is that? Okay, fair enough. That's a good question. So I'm going to give an argument in a similar way as the other one. Why the eternal cause, right, which is not a turtle, of course, by the way, must have a will. Okay, so what's the reason for thinking that? Well, the question we can ask is why are things a particular way, right? For example, my phone here. Why is my phone a particular way? It's a particular color. It's a particular shape and size, whatever, so on and so forth. It has a number of different distinct features that make it an individual phone versus a phone from any member in the audience, right? Why is my phone this way instead of another way? That's what I want people to think about. Or this thing here, which is a little timer here, because sometimes I get carried away when I do these presentations. So I got to keep track and let me know how much time I've got left. So why is this timer white instead of black? Why is it this shape instead of another shape? And so on and so forth. Why is the building that you guys are sitting in here right now, or this room, why is it a certain size and shape rather than another size or shape? Well, it's because it was made that way by an intelligent agent. There's somebody that created that room that you guys are in, that designed the floor plans for the room, that there's, I imagine, several hundred, maybe even thousands of people involved in, I don't know how big the university is, but I imagine there were thousands of people involved in putting everything together, right? So it was made that way by intelligent agents. And for people who are interested from the Islamic tradition, although there's a spelling error here that I just noticed, this is called the argument of takhsis. So it should be Takhsis, takhsis, which means specification. That things are a specific way, and what explains why they are a specific way rather than another way. Well, we can explain why the room or my phone or my timer is a certain way, in a certain shape and size and color, and so on and so forth, because they were designed or created by intelligent agents, human beings. But just like the turtle example, we must arrive at a first cause who is intelligent to explain the phenomenon of particularity or specification, right? Because if we say, okay, well, what about these intelligent agents, all these people who are here in the audience? Well, where did they come from? Well, they were made by other intelligent agents. Well, remember, we're trying to explain why things are a particular way. Well, they're a particular way because there are rational agents that make things a particular way, that specify them in a particular way. Okay, but then what about them? Where did they come from? What explains why that intelligent agent, why Jake is a certain way versus Brother Eunice? Why is he a certain way? Well, because there were intelligent agents that made them. Well, just like the turtle example, is it intelligent agents all the way down, keep going further and further? Well, if that's the case, you never actually get to a stopping point of explaining the phenomenon that you needed to from the beginning. So we must arrive at a first cause who is intelligent to explain the phenomenon of particularity or takhsis, specification. But then, so we must get to an intelligent agent that has a will which specifies why something is one way instead of another way. That all comes down to an intelligent creator with a will, because it's our faculty of will as human beings which is responsible for making things certain ways. So we must get back to a being that is eternal, that also has a will that specifies or creates something in a certain way instead of another way. Now, some people may say, hold on, and if you may have heard of Richard Dawkins, this famous biologist from the UK, from Britain, who's an atheist and very outspoken atheist. And his response to this type of argument was, well, hold on a second. Who designed the designer? In other words, well, you're saying that, but then in what case, what about God? Wasn't he designed? God is a particular way. He's all-knowing, he's all-powerful, et cetera, et cetera. Why is he that way instead of another way? Well, the easy response to this, in which Richard Dawkins, I don't think, really thought about, is that takhsis or specification only applies to beings that are not eternal. In other words, if I ask why my timer here is one way instead of another way, I can explain that because it's not eternal, right? It was made a certain way instead of another way at a certain time. But if it was eternally that way, although that's impossible, but if it was eternally that way, it wouldn't require a further explanation as to why it's this way instead of that way. And that's because specification or takhsis is due to an act of will. And the effect of an act of will necessarily has a beginning in time, i.e., it is not eternal. In other words, if I say that I did something, if I acted upon something based on my will, the effect that I produce from my will necessarily comes after my act of willing. So the cause necessarily precedes the effect, right? So if specification is due to an act of will, then when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not subject to specification or takhsis, is because he's eternal. In order for him to be responsible, or in order for this dalil or argument to be applied to him, he would have to be not an eternal being. Now, there are plenty of other arguments. There are other design arguments. There are other what are sometimes called cosmological arguments. There are arguments from reason, from logic, and I've given other arguments on my YouTube channel, so people are free to go look more of that up. But I tried to give two, in this short amount of time, try to give two simple arguments. One, which is a first cause argument based on you don't want to have turtles all the way down because then you're never explaining anything whatsoever. So you need to get back to a first cause. And then second, the first cause must have a will. And that's based on this idea of specification, why things are one way instead of another. And that doesn't apply to God because takhsis or specification is only on temporal or beings that have a beginning in time. And therefore, they can be one way instead of another based on the will of an external agent. Now, as I said, there are many other arguments that have been given, but that's all I have to go through at this time. Now that we've reached that a creator exists, because I don't know the audience, I don't know who's there. Maybe there are some non-Muslims. So I want to invite people to Islam, to Islamic monotheism, because some people will say, okay, Jake, you gave good reasons for thinking that there's a creator, but why should we think of Islam? And I'm sure many of the other speakers throughout the week will cover maybe topics that go into more detail about Islam specifically as it relates to this question. But I just want to give a very brief summary, and then I think we'll turn it over to a question and answer section. So this is from a chapter in the Quran, which is very well known. I'm sure you guys know. Surah Al-Ikhlas. It says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Say, He, Allah, is one. So there's only one creator. There's not three, there's not five, there's not two, there's one creator. Allahu Samad, right? He is the eternal, the self-sufficient. The scholars of tafsir explain that as-Samad can be understood as the being in which everything depends upon him, but he does not depend upon anything else. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He neither begets nor is he begotten. And obviously I don't have enough time to go into this, but this is a direct refutation, at least in part, of the Christian concept of God, because they say that the Son of God was begotten. He was begotten of the Father. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he doesn't beget, nor is he begotten. He's not born, and nor does he give birth. Why? Because, as you see, it contradicts with his samadiyya, meaning it contradicts with his attribute when he says Allahu Samad. If he were to be born, that means he would be a dependent being. Then he could no longer be a Samad. You see? So these verses mirror each other in that way. And then nor is there to him any equivalent. He's unique in his attributes, in his essence, in his existence. He's completely unique in all ways. There's nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Islam, from that aspect of what we call Tawheed, or the Islamic monotheism or divine oneness, is simple in that way. There's only one God, there's one creator. He is eternal, he's self-sufficient, he doesn't depend on anything, everything depends on him. He's not born, nor does he give birth, and there's nothing like him. Very beautiful chapter of the Quran. And then I just want to encourage the Muslims there who are in the audience to try to give da'wah. I know it may seem difficult. They may say, oh, Jake, we can't give a presentation like this. I'm sure you guys could do better than I did. I'm really sure of that if you put time into it. But nevertheless, even if you can't, the Prophet ﷺ, which I don't have the hadith here on the screen, but he said that you can convey from me even if it's a single ayah. So even if all you know is Qul huwallahu ahad, you can tell that to your neighbor. You can tell that to a classmate. And I'm not saying to do it in an awkward way, but try to find a way to give da'wah. Why? Because there's an obligation upon Muslims to give dawah. Now, dawah doesn't always have to be in terms of giving rational arguments. It could be through your behavior. It could be smiling at your neighbor and treating them well and respectfully. And they may start to see, oh, well, why is this guy behaving like this? Find out, oh, he's Muslim and looking to Islam and see the beauty in Islam. But nevertheless, we have to give dawah in some way. And part of it is through our speech. So the Quran says in chapter 41, verse 33, and who is better in speech than one who invites to Allah and does righteousness and says, indeed, I am of the Muslims. Now, this is a rhetorical question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not looking for an answer. He's saying there's none better in speech. There's nobody better in speech than somebody who invites to Allah, does righteousness, meaning does good deeds, and says, indeed, I am of the Muslims. So I want to encourage the Muslims in the audience to give da'wah and share Islam with their friends, family, colleagues, etc. With that being said, guys, I appreciate all of you for sitting there patiently with me. I'm sorry that I know that it may be a little bit difficult with the setup there that I'm tuning in virtually, but I pray that this was a benefit at least to you guys in explaining, just as a quick summary, that we don't necessarily need arguments. We can be justified without arguments. I gave an explanation based on the Islamic concept of the fitna with secular research studies to back this up. And then I gave some explanation of my experience that I think for most atheists, it's not truly an intellectual problem. There are usually other things going on. I gave a story explaining that. Then I gave two arguments, a first cause argument, and then I gave the argument of specification, or takhsis is known in the Islamic tradition, of why there must be a first cause with a will, who is the creator of everything. And then last but not least, of course, explaining just very briefly, the Islamic concept of monotheism. So once again, thank you guys for your attention. And I think if I'm not wrong, that we'll turn it over here to the host and look forward to any of your comments or questions.